Hello, everyone. Welcome to our hot potato conversation. We have exciting guest with us today, John Reed of Genomica. John, please say hi to our viewers and readers and listeners.
Hello, nice to be on the hot seat.
Awesome, super to have you with us. And as usual, I have Paul Moderman, my partner in crime with
Hi,
Boring
everyone.
Enterprise Nerds, and I'm Yelena Perfilieva. So we are super excited to have a hot potato style conversation where we pass along different subjects and give our super hot takes on them. So without further ado, let's begin on the subject. So the very first subject is a follow-up on the stories that we have written before in our Boring Enterprise Nerd letter. The story was CIOs in roundtables criticizing SAP. It came out when some CIOs from Germany shared some of the feedback with SAP, where they were not super duper happy about what's been happening in the world. And coincidentally, DSAC, it's a German SAP group conference, finished just few days ago. So there were some updates in similar vein from that conference. So if that's okay, Paul, what are your thoughts on did SAP actually hear CIOs?
Here's my hot take, or here's a hot thing I'll offer for this thing, is that I think this whole thing is where Christian Klein is going to earn his stock options payout for this stuff, right? Because this is a huge challenge, and as John acknowledged before we started, like, this is hard to tackle in one soundbite, but like the level to which people are like, rah, 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 what are you doing about this stuff, mixed with SAP's clear, like, yeah, but guys, we got to get to the cloud. We can't do it. Like, I can see the internal wheels turning on that discussion internally. Like, what a terrible thing to have to navigate. So I hope Christian Klein does it well, and I hope that we come out the other side with satisfied customers who can actually use the solutions that they've paid a ton of money for, that then get sort of dropped off the edge of the earth, kind of that stuff. I don't know. That's not a detailed take, but that's my take, is that Christian Klein can earn his options here in this navigational piece.
Awesome. Good for Christian. John, what do you think?
Yeah,
I agree with that. So far, though, I'm concerned because instead of kind of stepping back from some of the controversies, which I did a podcast on already that started with the earnings announcement this summer, he's kind of doubled down, as has the rest of SAP leadership.
Yeah.
And the important thing to understand DSAG specifically is last year around this time, they extracted from SAP some agreements around feature parity for on-premise versus cloud stuff. And so what's happened since feels a bit to them like a betrayal of last year's agreement. And the biggest thing to understand about these vendors, and this ties into the CIO story as well, is that every vendor in managing these large, complex products is going to have issues and problems. The question comes down to the caliber of your relationship with your most loyal customers, and you have to protect that. Things may not be perfect, but if the customers feel that they have an honest and open dialogue, then there's a chance. And what I read from the DSAG update so far is that it seemed like there was some good, honest give and take. However, I remain staunchly opposed and critical to SAP's current stance, particularly when it comes to sort of jumbling RISE and cloud into the same thing and essentially introducing friction for innovation, where I think customers should have access to innovation without friction. And I can say more about that, but I'll stop.
I like that, John. And I think too that, like, the idea of innovation itself as spread across the layer of anything in the enterprise is every hour that passes, innovation as a thing becomes like 0.1% more important to what enterprises are doing. And to even have generated a feeling like a door is being shut is like poisoning the well of tons of your customers' strategies for that stuff. Yeah.
And before we move on to the next hot potato, I just wanted to point out I just totally randomly stumbled upon this great article by John himself, circa 2013 in the Genomica.
How little
Where-
things change, huh?
Yeah. and you read it, I was really surprised by the date. It's 10 years ago. It's been 10 years, guys. So it's kind of scary. And it's funny, there is a part exactly talking about the issues that we're still talking about and experiencing today's debate over charging for innovations, and the hefty price tags attached will continue. So, well, it still continues. So you were totally.
You know what that's like? That's like, if you look at your parents or grandparents on their 40th wedding anniversary and look at the things they fight about, those things are going to be the things they're fighting about on their 50th anniversary too, right? SAP is 50 this year, and like that same idea 10 years ago, they were fighting about that then too. Like it's almost like that's baked into the DNA of how SAP has comported itself and done business, right? Is that struggle.
Just one final quick thing is that I think ultimately SAP is going to listen to the customer feedback on this, because it's been very vocal across the board. But the other thing is that it's not just customer input, it's market pressure, because if you erect barriers to so-called innovation right now in today's market, what's going to happen is your customers are just going to look at alternatives, whether it's AI or various kinds of cloud services for various kinds of apps that you're working on. They're just going to go elsewhere. And so that's, I think, going to push SAP to reconsider adding, like, when you want to do one thing, you shouldn't have to do two more. If I want to upgrade one thing, I shouldn't have to also do Rise. Like, and I told SAP, like, if you want to make a case that Rise is the best way to deliver innovation, that's fine. But I've been digging and digging. I can't find a single technical reason why you have to do Rise to consume these innovations. So let's be honest about that and not obscure the message. Having said that, I was told there were some more explanations around that coming out of the show, and I just haven't seen them yet because the show just ended and it's in Germany, and I was in Oracle CloudWorld Las Vegas, like in sleep deprivation mode. So it'll be interesting to see as the details of this conference came out, because it does seem like SAP made an attempt to engage in some sincere dialogue, and I can only hope that it was fruitful.
I have a fortune teller prediction, is that, John, as you learn more about that, I can only predict that I'll see it drop on Diginomica, and then I'll be like, oh, that's great, and it's going to get amplified through our channels too, because like we are just watching that so closely.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. You mentioned Rise with SAP. I was just listening to Coffee Corner podcast, which is great SAP podcast. It was recorded in August, and they talk about, we totally get it that cloud is a way to go, but why Rise with SAP is important as far as technology being available. And to me, it sounds pretty much like that old anecdote, like a man is asking a lady from high society whether she would sleep with someone for like $1 million, and she was like, well, times are tough, well, I would have to. And then she asked him whether she would sleep for $2, and she's obviously offended and like, who are you taking me to? And he said, well, we've already established who you are, we're just arguing about the price. So even though the joke may not have aged well, I feel that with SAP situation is pretty similar. So if you can deliver this with Rise, and so it means that's really possible in other stacks. So we're just arguing about the price now. We already know who you are. John,
I feel like I'm not sure if I want to touch that joke analogy thing, but I'm gonna let you run with it. But I'm probably gonna steer clear. I've got enough. I get enough social media blowback as it is, so I'm going to leave that to the side. But
it just that's just a thought that popped out in my mind.
You never know. You never know what can go viral. You can get TikToked any day now. So,
whoopsie daisy, that's gonna be. All right. So moving on to the next exciting hot potato. So Oracle CloudWorld. That's an Oracle conference that's like fresh, just finished. So, John, since you were actually there, I will just pass it over to you. What are your impressions? What do you want to share with us?
Well, it's funny because every enterprise community really is struggling with the same problems. So the shows really aren't all that different. I know vendors would really hate to hear me say that, right? Uh, but I'm sorry, they're not all that different. Though there are certainly moments where you see, oh, this company does things a little bit differently in this way, and that's really interesting. It's not that companies don't have certain areas of competitive advantage over others. It's just that when you peel back to the customer side, everyone's kind of coping with the same problems, right? And when you think about the problems right now, I think we could all easily make a list of things like macroeconomic headwinds, employee talent issues, struggles with talent and labor, questions about automation. Can AI help me? But I'm confused and there's so much hype. Like customers really bring the same common set of issues to the table. Data integration. Can I make better decisions? If so, how? Like those questions are really common throughout like really almost any enterprise vendor show. So I'm mostly trying to focus on those questions and understand what customers are dealing with. But, you can certainly look at the keynote stage and see certain points of emphasis, like Larry Ellison for a couple of years now is extravagantly decided he's going to fix healthcare both, nationally and internationally. And he's gotten some mockery, I think, from some of that because it is a little grandiose. I kind of see it both ways because I also kind of like stirring the pot around that conversation because, whatever his motivations, talking about healthcare and the problems with healthcare and how we're going to fix those problems, I think is a good conversation. So that's one thing you saw at CloudWorld is that. But in general, I think the trends that you see there are pretty common as far as like the trends around being much more industry focused. Every vendor is going to push that right now. Oracle does have some interesting differences with SAP if you want to just contrast real quick those. Like Oracle doesn't have the same vigorous, visible user groups that SAP does.
Yeah.
The German user group in particular, but also ASUG's very vocal if you compare that to the Oracle equivalent.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a big advantage for SAP, but we could have another whole show about how SAP has mostly squandered that advantage more often than not in the last 10 years. But I think there's something good about that, even if SAP doesn't always like it, because they're like, who do you think you're they kind of feel like their feet are held to the fire sometimes, I think. But I think ultimately they respond well to that. And I think that I would give SAP a win there. Where Oracle has, I think, some things that SAP could learn from would be, first of all, Oracle's done a pretty amazing job of allowing customers to remain on older releases and then offering them additional cloud services functionality where they can. Part of that is because Oracle has a huge OCI infrastructure play, and so they can get a lot of business out of that. But I think Oracle's done a much better job of maybe you call it innovate in place, where you don't have to make huge moves to innovate. So that's one really interesting thing to watch with Oracle. The other is Oracle is much more about infrastructure. So you see the whole NVIDIA partnership and how Oracle is basically positioned to make a huge fortune on AI, whether AI is ever successful for an enterprise or not. Because when you're in the infrastructure game, you win no matter what, right?
Yeah.
As long as companies go ahead and spend, you win. And so Oracle's, I think, licking their chops, rightfully so, at that. But then the other interesting thing is that Oracle has more large enterprise, what you might call public cloud ERP adoption. So their Oracle Fusion Cloud, I mean, SAP is not going to like when I say this, but they just have more customers who are running at scale at the large enterprise cloud level. That doesn't mean that those customers are necessarily always performing better or anything like that. It doesn't mean that Oracle is a better company than SAP or anything like that. But it is interesting because now Oracle can legitimately talk about shipping functionality to a broad group of customers that are all on basically the same release almost and on a quarterly basis. Now, customers will also say that can be like a little bit challenging sometimes to absorb that functionality. But this is sort of at the heart of that so-called clean core vision you hear from SAP, is the desire to get to this point. But you could also say that SAP dominates a lot more industries than Oracle. So Oracle's expertise around that is maybe focused a little more on certain verticals, like whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, retail. Oracle has maybe fewer stronger verticals. But anyway, that's a quick kind of compare and contrast.
And thank you for that, John. That's really good thoughts. I wasn't there, but I watched some of the keynotes. I browsed through the agendas and all that stuff. And one of the things that strikes me, and I guess this is going to be a compare contrast too, but like especially Larry Ellison, but I think his influence goes like trickles down through the whole org, is that I come away with the feeling that it's possible and I feel like this is possible because I think I am this kind of person, it is possible to be deeply, deeply excited about, holy crap, just as a technology, this thing is game changing. And deeply, deeply excited about like the industries you work in and the challenges that are actually going on there. And then being a place where those things can melt into the same spot, right? Because like if I kind of like tune my eyes away from the details and I just take away my sort of what my heart takes from like the way SAP does that stuff, is that I don't feel that techie excitement about, look at the world can change because of this and here's all the ways. Like that always gets a little bit muted. And I mean, maybe that makes sense and that's totally fine. But what I love about the Oracle approach to this is that like I feel like both of those voices are heard, and then everybody feels like the interesting pot in the middle is like where things can happen. Whether, I mean, we all know that keynotes are half or more or less BS, right? So who knows? But like the messaging coming from that left me a little more like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's go make a difference in these businesses because this like under the covers, this technology is helping this stuff. Whether it's true or not, my heart walked away with that feeling of that, right? That's how I kind of took things from that.
Yeah. So real quick on that, I meet with Steve Miranda like on virtually every quarter, and he runs a lot of their e-business applications, and he said that 80% of their generative AI like ideas are coming from customers right now. And so when I sat down with customers at the show, I would ask them, and they're generally pretty enthusiastic, but they do have concerns, and that's the push-pull, and we'll get into this topic a little more, but that's the push-pull. There's the risk, and but to your point, the customers are coming up with ideas. Like they're seeing like, okay, it can do this, but can it do this? And I think those conversations are interesting for those of us that realize that if we're just cynics, that's really boring. Like we have to be a little bit open to new things as well. And I think that conversation's good. But one final thing I wanted to say that you guys might relate to is that if your listeners have never watched an Ellison keynote, you should watch the last couple, because he might be the last keynote speaker left in the whole industry where his handlers are literally sitting like praying that he doesn't go off script and say something outrageous, because he can say whatever the hell he wants on stage.
Yeah.
And I wish there was more of that in this industry. Hasso used to be like that.
Hasso was the example. Yeah.
One of my favorites was when Hasso told Bill McDermott, the CEO, to put down his iPad in the middle of the keynote. I mean, that was just one of the best moments. But he was like, unless it's a sale, right? Unless you're working on a sale, then put that down. I mean, that was just like so brilliant and so disarming. And the only other CEO that even comes close to that thing of like handlers are nervous that I know of is Benioff. And the rest of them, like, it's basically like they might be a little unscripted, but they're not nervous. But literally the people that handle those two executives are literally scared. And I think that creates a much more interesting keynote to watch. So whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah, that's totally true. I did get that sense too, because there was like, I know we got to go on, but like Larry was making fun of Aaron Rodgers the whole time. Right. And I'm sure that wasn't in like his 6 weeks ago prepped script, right? But he couldn't help himself. He just was going there, you know? Yeah, it was pretty good for that perspective too.
Awesome. I'll have to watch that. Sweet. All right. So buzz. So moving on to to our next subject. Okay. We always have one subject that is hot potato. That's like hottest of them all. Subject of the day, month, and year. And today, where is AI beef? Essentially, everyone is talking AI, but where is the beef? Is in that famous quote from, where was it? Wendy's restaurant.
Like Wendy's, yeah.
So, Paul, since you are designated AI expert of boring enterprise nerds, I will start with you, but I will have to kind of do like Oscar ceremony, start playing music.
Yeah.
Go on, please.
Yeah. I will try to keep it short, because like I'm a pretty big tech dork for it. So the one thing I want to say, and I think this bridges the Oracle topic and where we're going now too, is that generative AI is a different thing, both technically but also like culturally, than any of the previous versions of AI in the universe, right? Like we've all probably heard about like predictive analytics and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. And it never felt like people really truly grabbed onto it. I mean, I know it's out there and I know there are solutions out there that offer that stuff, but it never reached sort of this like escape velocity to like, oh my gosh, this is what we needed, or like it never got to that world where people, everyday people, grasp what's going on there. Generative AI, especially because of chat, let's just be honest, ChatGPT, everybody gets it. Everybody can see, even if they don't see all of the techie details, they can see, oh, this is different. This is interesting. And so that like way more heads with gears are turning of people who aren't techies. They can now grok. They see that there's something different here. And they say, oh, this is AI too? Well, what can this do for my business? Like that is the difference now between predictive analytics and classification and segmentation and all that kind of stuff. Like that's the difference here that bridges, or that goes across the Oracle approach and the SAP approach, where SAP realizes too that like everyone's talking about it. SAP, I think, hasn't had quite as much yet of the like concrete, boom, here's a thing. There you go. Here's $1 trillion of sales of this, whatever. But like, it's just like you said, John, the customers are coming forward with, they have their own ideas. I don't think people really had necessarily lots of ideas about predictive and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. Gen AI, everyone's got their little pet theories about what they could do first. So that's my hot take on this, or part of it anyway.
John, what's hot potatoes thrown over to you, John?
Okay, so see if I can rattle through this. So we have to put the term AI to the side semantically and just accept that we're going to use it, even though like I question whether we should be using the term intelligence at all for any of these systems, including generative AI. The idea that AI doesn't have meat on the bone doesn't really hold up if you want to talk about the whole umbrella of AI, because when you look at everything from robotics to computer vision, when you look at the fortune that Google has amassed through search, when you look at the phenomenon of things like GPS, like AI actually exists in a lot of different places that we don't even realize. And predictive, like shopping, for example, and recommendation engines are obviously hugely powerful on the consumer side, and that's been proven. So there's meat on the bone there already, and a lot of customers have already been working on a number of those things. Generative AI, as you've rightly pointed out, Paul, is a totally different can of worms at a lot of different levels. And the first thing to understand is that none of these use cases have even really shipped yet, and they're going to start to ship later in the year. But the ones that are shipping are really, I wouldn't even call them low hanging fruit. I would call them very basic use cases, like automating job descriptions for HR is a really good example of a, and I'm making a lot of people angry because I'm really looking into the precise nature of this technology. And there's actually some inherent limitations with it, which is why I call it an generative AI an evolution, not a revolution. And there's some very specific reasons, because you're using a technology that doesn't understand language or context. And that's why these notions that you can get rid of hallucinations are ludicrous. Never mind that it's a very expensive technology to run. It's full of problems with bias, all of this kind of stuff. But look, I mean, there are some interesting use cases right now, and they center around things like what a colleague of mine, Hyun Park, calls instant mediocrity, which is not as bad as it sounds, because humans can only be mediocre in a very deliberate way. Instant mediocrity at scale means generating a lot of mediocre content. You're like, what can I do with mediocre content? Well, job descriptions. There's I would encourage
pretty good for it.
I would encourage marketers not to run too far with this. Digital assistants also, but not a really smart digital assistant, but one that's very focused on helping you with a confined set of tasks within a specific domain, right? So a friend of mine, his HR system, he can provision employees, he can ask for leave requests via some kind of a digital assistant framework powered by Gen AI. It's a lot better than the chatbots of old. So that's another example of a use case. But the gist of it is that all of these use cases are really human in the loop use cases, because the technology at the moment is limited. And we can talk about how the technology could maybe overcome that at some point or not. I have very strong views on that. I have more content coming up on this topic, but the point is, at the moment, that's kind of what we're looking at. And I think, but even within its limitations, it's still a powerful technology. And to your point, it's a creative technology that gets people thinking of, hey, could I use it for this? And you might think, well, job descriptions, that's really bland. But I've talked to a number of HR people that in the last few weeks that are very excited about it, because this is a huge chore for them, and a huge, you would talk about boring enterprise nerds. I mean, to me, like, there's a huge sex appeal and a not boring part of getting rid of administrative busy work, because then you can kind of do other shit that matters more. In theory, unless companies use it as a headcount reduction exercise, but I think that's going to get them in trouble.
Yeah,
the biggest. Oh, I could go. I'm with you, John. I could go on this for days, but like, I think some of the biggest things you're seeing too is like in the software dev space as well, where like none of the developers are saying right now this can replace me, I can't do it, but there are a ton of developers who are saying, yeah, this if I use it right, it does like help me do things better or more productively, right? There are the intern type tasks that you can task out to some of this stuff and then kind of review it and go, yep, okay, that's good, and fit it into your larger human framework of the goal I'm going after. But at this point, it's not like I can say, hey, make me an app that does whatever and just publish it to the world, and it will just make it perfectly and do it. Like, there's nuance to that, and there's like, if you're using it to enhance your own human creativity or your own human productivity, that there are lots of channels for that piece of it right now.
Just real quick on the coding thing too, I would argue that this is simply an even more powerful tool in a low-code toolkit that already existed. There were already other interesting low-code tools and no-code tools. This is another one that really has a kick to it, because generative AI seems to do better with code syntax than it does with actually human language. So it's compelling. But you know what's funny is that, like, when I talk to people who are claiming the biggest success with this in terms of, oh my God, like I did the work of 100 developers or whatever, most of the people that are happiest about this can move fast and break things, and with very few consequences. Once you insert these tools into enterprise environments where going production with code is a big deal, and there's governance and there's testing and there's debugging and there's all this stuff, I find a much more cautious view. So I think we have to be really careful who we're listening to here.
Yeah. I think your point about productive use and enterprise scale use, it's totally valid. A lot of things, it's like, oh, neat. It's like it works on my machine, equivalent for development world. Whether
it's like someone's like, I built a WordPress website. I was like, great, another shitty WordPress website.
Yeah, like, did you?
Nice.
How many more of those do we need on the internet? Like basically a viral troll factory that no one's going to visit. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, sweet. That's what technology is for. But before we move on, because I think it's definitely super interesting, super hot topic. I'm just curious, what would be if you put yourself in potential shoes of, let's say, typical enterprise user of technology, like a customer sales rep or maybe inventory manager or like purchasing manager, what would you think, like, for you as that business user would be the actual valuable application of technology? And I would say, for myself, I'm totally seeing more intelligent digital assistants being super helpful. But being intelligent assistants, I think that's a great part of it, because all those chatbots and very primitive, I give you this information and you give me back other information stuff, has not really held very, very well. So what do you think, Paul? If that's okay, I will pass on to you first.
Yeah. Okay. So my take on this is that I think most, like, so I'm gonna start with developers, but then I'm gonna go broader than that. I think most developers are trying to sort of like turn their large language model API things into like this very deterministic, I give it this and it always spits out a perfect whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's just the wrong use for that stuff. Like the large language models, and I'm talking about the language models specifically here, it's a box of really complicated geometry that spits out like information shaped words, right? And so if you use this stuff, some of the best uses I've found for it is like, I need to enhance my own creativity. And part of that is like, it's like brainstorming. Half the fun of brainstorming is all of the terrible ideas that don't work. but that point you to the thing that does work. And what has worked best for me with this is like, it's a language shaped thing. And so if I say, hey, give me 10 ideas for whatever, I almost never pick one of those ideas, but seeing that stuff like immediately vomit out, that enhances my own, like, you know what, if I take this from there and just from there and combine it with the other insight I have, now I'm there. It's like I said with the code stuff, so far it's made me faster at getting from head scratch to, yeah, here's the thing that might work, right? That's my
interesting. John, what do you think?
So just real quick, your example is, Paul, is a great one. And I've seen a bunch of people who have generated some good results on these brainstorming type exercises.
Yeah.
And also it's pretty fantastic at summarization of longer pieces of content. I also made fun of a chief marketing officer that posted a blog written by ChatGPT. He's patting himself on the back, and I thought it was crap. It was full of, it was the kind of jargon laden crap that is our enterprise at its worst. But the point being, like, the reason that the fact that this is happening, and to your point around the surge of adoption, is why enterprises have to reckon with that. Because do you want your employees performing brainstorming exercises on ChatGPT, loading in some of your potentially IP related information, which is going to become part of their training set going forward? No.
Yeah.
So are you going to ban this stuff? Have fun with that. So what you need is enterprise sanctioned tools. So that's why hands are getting forced. But the one thing I would say, and I just wrote about this on Diginomica, sorry for the plug, on enterprises.
Plug.
But the content's free. So there is
we like plugs. Go for it.
But enterprises are going to test the limits of LLMs. And what I'm very, very fascinated by is to what extent are we're never going to get rid of hallucinations, in my view. But I'm fascinated by, instead of using a chat GPT that's been trained on everything from like Reddit to who the heck knows, can we have industry specific LLMs that are then infused with customer specific data, and perhaps even further fine-tuned with domain experts? And can we get a much more accurate result, to your point, around using these tools for such exercises and creating meaningful content of various kinds, even if it's just for internal use? How accurate and interesting and useful can these tools get? And that's going to be a very interesting question. And within the next year, we're going to start seeing the answers. The debate will be how much humans have to be involved in that, because some generative AI advocates point to, they don't want humans involved because they know that kind of destroys the revolutionary vibe behind it. So they point to things like RAG, which is a technique that's gaining prominence, a technical way of improving the accuracy of these models. My personal feeling is that human domain experts are going to have to be involved to get optimal results. But I'm really curious just how optimal these results can be, because at the moment we've really only tested them based on, chat GPT based frameworks and things like that.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Super interesting subject.
Hot potato. Woo!
Yeah, we'll keep returning to it, I'm sure. Our last potato of the day is sustainability, which, without a shred of sarcasm, I can say it's a hugely important subject, I think, for everyone in the world. But at the same time, there is a lot of hype and what is called greenwashing that also lives and latches on the same subject. So if that's okay, John, I would like to hear from you. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I did write a piece about how, Wake Up Enterprises, ESG has teeth, quit paying attention to obsessing about generative AI. And my only point there was that I think we have to take back the narratives and not just to be spoon-fed the vendor narratives on what's important. And most vendors, with the exception of SAP and a couple others, are not really pushing the ESG narrative. And I think it has to be looked at. Now, you can criticize a lot of vendors, including SAP, for not being fully prepared for this moment, because, Paul, you had me in a podcast where I was kind of talking about continuous everything. And to me, the future of ESG is it has to be embedded in everything you do. Like when you're screening suppliers, you have to see which suppliers have different ratings for different uses of toxic materials and stuff like that. When you're managing plants, you have to see power consumption options and how you could mediate those options. And it has to be built into everything. And I would ask vendors, like, why wasn't this happening years ago when you first started talking about this topic? We're very far into this now. But fortunately, there's a new breed of ESG vendors that are starting to think like this and starting to think about how we are accountable on a day in, day out basis in a way that makes our business perform better. But to your point, greenwashing is totally annoying. And the whole idea that like, oh, this feels good and we're doing good and everything feels right. And we have an interactive sustainability report and you can play around with it in your free time. That's just a bunch of poppycock. But but there are regulatory frameworks that are emerging. The question is just how strong will these frameworks be? And we don't know yet. Like California, we're kind of waiting to see what happens there. SEC has some stuff coming. Europe has the most, and there's more stuff coming there, but it's unclear how accountable every company will be. But the point is, the accountability is changing into things like scope 3, where you're now responsible for suppliers in a way you haven't been in the past. And so whenever you see compliance, that changes the conversation, because compliance has teeth, and compliance forces us to confront these problems, because that's how you lose your job, is by being not compliant. You don't lose your job, by not, saying like, oh, how great sustainability is, but you lose your job with compliance.
Interesting.
My hot take on the whole sustainability greenwashing thing within enterprise software and that kind of stuff is that, like, there is of course attention on like, how can my enterprise solutions help me stay compliant or be compliant or all that kind of stuff. What I think is like the reality is that all of us, from children to adults to government leaders to all that kind of stuff, we all bear the burden and responsibility of, like, this is the planet we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so it is great and good, I think, that it continues to sort of trickle out from, in some way, from like ERPs or enterprise software vendors toward their customers. I think, like, if I go out on a little bit of a limb here, if you're a vendor making like toolkits for that kind of stuff to help your customers, you can do even more good for the planet by using what you learn from your customers using it to continue to influence upward toward government and regulation itself, right? SAP or whoever can not only make tools that go outward, they can learn inward and then share that outward to regulatory, government, etc. And like, that would be the true impact. That would tell me you actually care about this thing and aren't simply, not that's bad, but that you're not simply just meeting sort of a market demand for it, right? Like, my personal hot take is like, care about the planet as well as your customers, because the planet contains your customers, right? So
yeah, this is not something that is very romantic and feel good. But if you go back to the landmark documentary, The Corporation, it talked a lot about externalities and how companies put a lot of weight on externalities because they can essentially have a clean set of balance sheets. Sustainability is the ultimate externality, where, okay, you're leaving your community to deal with some of the problems that you as a company have created through your production processes. And more communities are rising up and saying, well, actually, that's part of your balance sheet. That belongs on your balance sheet. That's your obligation to confront that. Those are really, really healthy conversations. The question becomes, how well can we actually hold multinational corporations that are larger in most cases than most governments, to account? So that's the cynicism that you're alluding to, Helena, when you started this. I think partially is because we're ultimately so powerless in this context. So a lot of it does feel like BS in the end. But I will say, as far as greenwashing, that software companies committing to carbon zero emission goals is nice and stuff, but I want to hear how you're helping your customers do that, because your customers are in much more difficult industries to achieve that than you are. Sorry, but it's just a fact. So your carbon neutral goals are great, but let's hear about what your goals are for your customer footprint, and then we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, and I feel this subject suffers a lot from that underpants GNOME syndrome, where step 1 is some kind of interactive report, step 2 big question mark, and step 3 in this case is profit or sustainability. It's sometimes difficult to connect the dots.
Wait, you don't like interactive reports where you can like click on numbers and see
I live for
come on, man.
I live for interactive reports. I'm just having trouble connecting the dots there. How do they exactly contribute to betterment of our planet? So I'm far from being an advertisement outlet for SAP, but this is something that I heard about literally just the day before. So SAP is launching this re-commerce idea. I'm not even sure what it's going to be exactly. It lives in the customer experience space. From what I gathered, it has something to do with handling your goods that are being returned and reuse of products that you're making, selling, etc. I think this is actually one of the pieces where even myself as a consumer at the end, I can totally connect the dots. So I can, I see a lot of waste. I know that I return a lot of items because it's a reality of online commerce. You don't see the goods, but then you get them and they're nothing that you imagined. So I really would love not to be part of the problem, but I would love to get some help with that. And I think enterprises also would love to have more assistance. All right. So any closing statements from you, Paul? I will start with you.
I mean, John, your pre-show caution is fair warning, is that like the generative AI stuff it doesn't fit in a hot potato, generally speaking. But I think we did make some interesting French fries out of that hot potato here. But like, just like there's so much more to be said about that than what we can contain in a bit here.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be my big thing with listeners is I think the showrunners here did a great job of hitting on some really, really potent topics that I think are really important. And I would just encourage folks to dig a lot deeper because it's impossible. Each one of those topics could have easily been a full show. And like, for example, we could talk about SAP's sustainability approach for a long time. They have a ton of different initiatives and products and frankly deserve some credit for how aggressive they push the issue. But the point is we can't do that in this format, but the format is cool in the sense that it puts people like me on the hot seat. And I like that. So thanks for giving me the hot potato.
Thanks for coming, John.
Yeah, so thank you for coming, John. It was great pleasure hosting you, John, today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, our listeners and viewers and readers for your support. And please, if you do not subscribe to our newsletter, please do. If you have not visited John's Diginomica website, please do as well. There are many very, very great articles on many subjects, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.